Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room for February the 5th, February the 6th, 2019, episode 124. And I am Wes Fryer coming to you from Oklahoma City, where it's been an exciting day. And not just technology news, but technology news is what we're here to talk about. And I am the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School here in Northwest Oklahoma City, a little community known as The Village. And we are, I guess, enjoying some pretty mild weather. I talked to my parents. They're, I think, getting an ice storm now in Kansas. We've been below the freeze line. It was like 37-ish, whatever. We've been foggy. And anyway, isn't the world a wild place? But joining us from a bit of a colder place, but not a polar vortex place, is Dr. Jason Neiffer from beautiful Missoula, Montana. And Jason, how is life in the Missoula online learning fast lane these days?
Well, pretty good. It is 12 degrees tonight in Missoula, Montana, although I got to say it is a balmy 12 degrees in comparison to other locations in Montana. Currently, Montana, very large state, takes about 12 hours to drive from end to end if you take roads that are passable by standard cars. It's -11 in Great Falls, Montana tonight, -11 in Lewistown, Montana, -10 in Glendive, Montana, -10 in Havre, Montana, and -15 near the Canadian border in far northeastern Montana. So we are getting a little taste of the vortex here in Big Sky Country. I am joining from Missoula, Montana, where I am the curriculum director and assistant director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the University of Montana campus, fabulous Missoula, where we have been experiencing a pretty big snow dump the last 6 or 7 days, and which is good. To be honest, I like having 4 seasons. Montana is famous for having 4 very distinct seasons. And if it's going to be wintertime, it might as well snow. So we've got at least I'd say a foot or so of snow on the ground. My wife is actually in Big Sky, Montana tonight, which is known for its ski hills, and she reports it's much cooler there and there's a lot more snow where she is at tonight. And winter is a good thing. So this here, though, is not This Week in Weather. It is the EdTech Situation Room. We are a podcast that takes a look at news headlines from across the technoverse and kind of shoots them through an educational prism to talk about how and why and if they might impact the classroom environment. You can get a copy of our show notes at our website, edtechsr.com. You can also download copies of the podcast, and we'll talk about it a little bit later at the end of the episode. So lots of interesting news this week. As always, we probably have way more links than we have time to talk about in our short hour together. But, Wes, where would you like to start on the podcast tonight?
Well, let's see. Quite a bit of interesting Google and Google-ish news. Why don't we actually start with a little talking about the creator update for February and what the wonderful CEO of YouTube, I don't know if I'm going to be able to say her name right. And did I even move that into the right spot? Susan, is it Jawicki? How do you say her name? Wojcicki? Anyway, Susan W. She's the CEO of YouTube. So this is under our headline, Google and Googlish. No, it wasn't. You moved, that is Google and Googlish, but we actually have a YouTube category. So I think you put in the post from the YouTube creators blog on February 5th, YouTube in 2019, looking back and looking forward. There is an accompanying video by Susan Wojcicki. We'll find out how. You can help us if you're a listener, and I'm blowing her name, which I probably am not doing a great job. But anyway, it talks about our priorities this year, and it's a short video. And first off, the YouTube community and the creator community is incredibly important to the platform. Community standards are extremely important. There's a ton of outlier, conspiracy, fake news, call it what you will, content that has been amplified on social media. Of course, that's not just on YouTube. Facebook has been a big offender there, but the algorithms that YouTube has that have maximized attention and the eyeballs, that are watching have led to some perhaps unintended consequences, and those kinds of things have are being addressed. And so the first thing I want to say about this is kudos to them for really addressing these kinds of issues head on. The ways in which they are addressing community standards and, for instance, pranks. I think that might have been something we mentioned last week in the show, that they are, trying to not encourage dangerous and harmful pranks and those kinds of things. There was an acknowledgement in this of the most disliked video, which was, I think, the retrospective that they had last year. There's been a lot of backlash from the creator community. So I think there's some lessons to learn here from an educational technology and school perspective. Number one, let's recognize how huge YouTube is in the learning of probably just about every teenager who has access to the internet today, which is almost all of them. And number two, let's recognize how important it is to be responsive to your community and to address these kinds of issues, right? YouTube's not throwing their hands up. Of course they're not, because they're going to monetize this, but saying this is intractable, this is impossible, for us to be able to address. And so I think, I respect the transparency that they have in talking about these kind of issues. And I think these are actually great things to talk to students about, right? Because, trolling and terrible comments, also very much outlier content, and the ways in which, folks can be radicalized in their perceptions of the world and their opinions and things like that. These are important things to grapple with. So I thought that was a significant video, and I think you might have put the creators blog post in there. So what are your thoughts, Dr. Neifer?
Well, first, a shout out to Peggy George, who's in our chat room tonight, that points out that it's Susan. I'm probably going to screw up, even though I have the phonetics going in front of me. Vukitsky, along those lines, and Peggy's probably laughing at me just right now. But
Vuchisky.
Chisky is the name. Chis was the thing I couldn't roll off my tongue. And I have a bit of a Central and Eastern Europe background too. But the reason why I like that creators blog piece, and the reason why I like the seeing that messaging, is that I've really had a lot of soul searching over YouTube the last 2 or 3 years, and part of it is because I still maintain, and I get why there are logistical issues in this. I really am firmly against blocking YouTube in school districts, and I remain against it. I think it is one of the best learning tools that's ever been created by humans. It is an extraordinary library, and if you take out even the billions of videos that are really not worth anything and are just, my YouTube channel alone contains probably a half dozen random experiments that really aren't of any real value. You take all those videos out, you still be left with hundreds of millions of amazing videos that are important for history and culture and teaching and learning and all sorts of things that it's impossible to really wrap our brains around. But the thing that I think is also important too is that at some point there has to be a way that YouTube and YouTube-like services exist, understanding that they're within a marketplace, understanding that the creators are creating for more than just educational purposes. They're probably also in it for money and compensation. I know a lot of people under the age of 25. I have experience having an exchange student in my house last year who was watching YouTube as his primary source of media consumption, that this is a phenomenon that's not going to go away. At the same time, I think it's worthwhile questioning, should we be having conversations about who our students are watching? YouTube, in my mind, does not replace a teacher. In fact, I think it's disingenuous to ever suggest that, in that if that were true, we could simply hand infants an iPad with a YouTube app on it, say good luck, and pick them up 18 years later ready for the world, right? It's so much more complex than that.
And Dr. Neifer, as a distance learning guru, you're not advocating a strictly video-based online education. Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because something we've learned very much so in our experiences at the Montana Digital Academy is that there is a perception that you can just learn by video, right? But I like to describe it this way. Imagine for a moment you are the most engaging lecturer on earth. And I've really experienced as a student engaging lectures in my 20-some years in formal education. And I got to tell you, imagine for a moment a huge auditorium with 500 students and the most amazing lecturer ever in the central front room, and everyone in the room has a stop button. and see how many times a video is stopped, ignored completely, temporarily stopped. There's just no comparison between those two pieces. And in fact, great e-learning, as research tells us now, and people with experience in the genre, is a mix between interaction, text, video, all of the above, to kind of weave together a great learning experience. And so, despite all of that, I can't believe how amazing YouTube is as a distribution platform for a worldwide audience. And really, in my mind, it's true. You could literally just have the YouTube app on a television and be endlessly entertained, maybe not with as much fictional programming, although YouTube has been trying that as of late. But there's enough nonfiction and user-generated content that it could really last a lifetime of learning and engagement.
Well, if I could segue to one other article, and then we'll defer to your choice. At the end of our Google section, I put in a PC Magazine article from January 29th that links nicely with this, called How Google's Jigsaw is Trying to Detoxify the Internet. This is an absolutely fantastic read. And in fact, I would even say anyone involved in social media, and especially commenting, we've talked about this on the show before, Jason, I know you've lamented, even in local politics and local news, how incredibly vitriolic and troll-like the comment section in the local paper can be, to the point where, many have just given up. This is a great article about Alphabet is, Google's parent company, how they've got an API called the Perspective and different projects. And this really gives us a window into how AI, or artificial intelligence and machine learning today, is augmenting human cognitive capabilities with superpowers. And so they've got a lot of projects. The statistics in here about the New York Times receiving, I think they said something like 15 to 18,000 comments a day. And until not that long ago, they were using a human team to look at each and every one of those comments. They have a fantastic metaphor here called the haystack metaphor. And that is, if you've got, let's say, 18,000 comments, it's this massive, virtual haystack. How helpful to have an algorithm that can help you identify things that may be toxic, may need a second look. You're not just having to subject humans to all of that. And this article very convincingly, I think, makes the case that this AI world, especially when it regards comment moderation and addressing community standards, it's not a let's turn it over to the machines and humans are hands off. It's very much AI and machine learning is giving us as humans superpowers to be able to more quickly and readily identify potentially problematic content, but then make the call. And the algorithms are getting better and they're getting smarter, but we have a long way to go. Actually, this article inspired me to finally join Reddit. And I don't know how many of our listeners are Reddit users. I know you are, Jason. My son loves Reddit. And there's a Reddit group I think it's called Change My Mind. And so it's talking about how rare true debate can be online, and that this algorithm, this whole initiative by Google and by others, the Mozilla Foundation's been involved. In fact, I think one of their projects just got bought by Vox or somebody. But this is super important stuff, right? We need to be able to have discourse and intelligent dialogue using these digital tools that connect us. And because stuff has gone so mainstream, and outlier and extremist voices have been, I think, empowered, and not just empowered, amplified beyond what is healthy for us as a society, we really need these tools that are gonna help us. So, have you seen this happen in any positive signs, I guess, in your local news? And because I know that's something that you're passionate about and you've commented on before.
Well, other than turning it off, right? That's really been the biggest movement here in Montana. My wife and I actually started a campaign in our local city of Missoula, Montana, to try to get the local paper to turn off comments. And my wife actually called the editor and found out they were actually about to announce they were going to turn commenting off. And I did have to deal with some debate on Facebook amongst friends and colleagues about whether or not that had First Amendment implications. And my argument to there always has been that it's been never easier than now, right, to express your opinion. If you want to create a news talk show on YouTube that broadcasts live every night, you can do that with a laptop and an internet connection, right? You want to be two guys in two states that ramble on about technology once a week and send it out to a worldwide audience. We can assure you it didn't take a ton of skill to start up this podcast, right? And I think there's a real power there for that. But I do think at the same time, like, I have once in a while seen interesting discourse go on. And in fact, you mentioned Reddit. Reddit's something I'm reintroduced myself to. I had an account there that was 12 years old that I recently got back into, and I love it. It's really great. And I'm not talking about I'm not on the Donald Trump message boards or the politics message boards or the Nancy Pelosi message boards or any of the places where political discourse is likely to blow up into something ill-productive. But when it comes to discussing Chrome OS or Pixel books or Android phones or my obsession about notebooks and fountain pens and pens in general, like things that I'm really passionate about, finding that community has been very important to me, actually. And I feel, affirmed by that, which is what the power of the internet is supposed to be in the first place. And I think you're starting to notice a trend in the way we discuss these issues on the EdTech Situation Room, that we got to find a way to find a balance for these things somewhere, right? It's not an option for us to stuff the internet back in Pandora's box. It's also not an option for us to stuff social networking into Pandora's box again. These things are out in the open. So finding a way for us to come up with a meaningful a way to engage with these technologies and to encourage our students and one another to have civil discourse on them, and to add technology to beat back the problems of technology. I think that's something that is truly important and something we need.
You are being partially cat muted. And for those of you that are listening and not watching, the large feline that has joined Jason's image has also inserted itself somehow on his microphone.
So, am I better now?
You are better now. The cat mute is off.
Right. So that's something to keep in mind. And, I have been very encouraged. I've seen a lot of reference towards teaching about fake news in classrooms. I know social studies teachers, my sisters and brothers in the social studies teaching field have taken on these particular issues with fervor in their classroom. I am excited about that they are attacking and helping kids develop skills. I believe in the past I've ranted a little bit about one of the most detrimental things about No Child Left Behind is how social studies was decimated in K-12 education, dramatically less hours by many factors, less spent on social studies, which has led to, in my mind, students being ill-informed and ill-prepared and ill-equipped to be in a media-rich world. So great, let's push those discussions back into the classroom.
Awesome. All right, where to next, sir? We do again have a bit of a queue of articles. So
we do. Well, there's a topic that might send us down a rabbit hole. Another topic that might send us down a rabbit hole, but it's very exciting breaking news that I learned about earlier this week. Hold on, I need to deal with this feline here. We have one pet remaining in our house, and now that she's noticed that she is all alone, she
is ready to join the dialogue.
Yeah, she wants to be paid attention to. So I believe this was originally broken by, I think it was The Verge, actually, but Spotify has announced that it has purchased Gimlet Media for I think the amount was $260 million. And a little background, if you don't know about Gimlet Media. Gimlet Media was started by Alex Bloomberg of This American Life and Planet Money fame, and his goal was to start a narrative podcast network. So imagine for a moment the episodic nature of podcasts, not unlike the one you're listening to now, but with more of a focus on what public radio does with narrative shows. So think This American Life or Planet Money or even some of the fictional things that Selected Shorts is a good example of another great NPR show, but trying to merge those two things together. And Alex Bloomberg released a podcast called Startup that was about him starting up this company. It was wildly popular. I loved it. The first season was nothing short of amazing. It included terrible pitches by Mr. Bloomberg to try to get venture capital funding for his venture. It included some stressful times when it appeared that he wouldn't be able to get enough money to live and survive, which is not an uncommon startup phenomenon. And then eventually he picked up a co-founder. They started up a company. They have a dozen or so podcasts, including a couple that they've kind of moved on and retired on. And they're, in multi-millions of dollars a year of ad revenue and have dozens and dozens of employees. Well, it was rumored over the weekend that they were in advanced talk with Spotify to pick up Spotify to buy the company, and then it was announced yesterday that indeed Spotify has purchased not only Gimlet Media, this podcast company, but also another company I'm a little less aware of, and now I can't see what the name is. It is something that seemed really simple, and I forgot what it was. But there's a second company that does podcasting services. Now, what has happened in the last 72 hours with this news is that a lot of other podcasters are talking about it, and I didn't throw the link in there, although I can. This Week in Tech on the Twit Network talked about this for about 15 minutes, and the number they kept citing, which I think has been in a couple of the articles, podcasting is only, and I'm going to use that term for a second, only a $700 million business. There's
Anchor is
the tool, right? And they do audience tracking services. They have an app that you can create call-in shows on.
It's the best tool I recommend for teachers and students, by the way, to make your own podcast right now is Anchor. So that's a huge acquisition.
Well, and that's a key piece here, right? That the industry, I think, has gained a lot of notoriety by just this purchase, because now it's a viable business to start up a good podcast company and then sell it to someone else with the cognizance and the technical ability there. So this inspires a ton of questions for me. For example, I like about 4 shows at any given time from the Gimlet. I'm a very big podcast listener, less so in the last 6 months or so, but I've re-engaged in that media environment in the last 30 days or so. There are several shows like Gimlet I like. I would be highly disappointed if they weren't available on my personally preferred podcast aggregator, which is Pocket Casts, an app owned by a conglomeration of public radio organizations. But it's starting to seem that the big dogs in media are picking up on and staking claims in the broader podcast industry. So I guess I'd start up with first, Wes, are you a Gimlet listener at all?
I am some, but as I've mentioned on the show, the Smart Assistant, specifically the Google Home, has become transformative for me in terms of increasing the amount of podcasting content that I'm listening to. And so I definitely love, recommendations. And I think is Gimlet, let's see, I'm going to have to actually go into my subscriptions. This is one thing, by the way, that you don't get with your Smart Assistant is being able to, see the breakdown of all the podcasts. So Today Explained is Vox. I'm trying to think of which Gimlet, Ezra Klein, that's Vox also. So I think there is a Gimlet podcast on here somewhere amidst the 120 subscriptions. So, but no, it's not coming to me right away.
And the interesting thing for me about this, beyond the fact that we have our own little quarter of the podcasting world in which we engage in, it's only a $700 million business, even though it's producing thousands of hours a day of content.
Reply All. That's
also on my list as well. In fact, some of the best podcasting I've heard about internet culture related issues has been on Reply All. And I believe that Alex poached those two from WBUR in Boston, the gentleman that hosts that podcast. They used to host, I think, the TDLR podcast, maybe. But the notion here that it's a viable business, I think, is pretty important. What that inspires me to take a look at then is there was another great article that I had come across, I was reminded of this week, 13 predictions for podcasting in 2019. This is a December, I think, 19th article from a guy named Steve Pratt, and it's from Pacific Content, which is, I believe, engaged in this content advertising business. But I thought it would be quickly, interesting to go over this, especially in the light of the fact that Wes and I both make a podcast and we listen to podcasts to see if any of these things are familiar or interesting pieces to me. So first and foremost, prediction number 1, this has been predicted for literally a dozen years. Podcasting goes mainstream I would say that it's as mainstream as it's probably going to get until the model changes. After the big podcast of a couple of years ago, Serial is the one I'm thinking of. Serial was a wildly popular podcast. It brought at least 6-digit numbers of people that weren't really into podcast listening into the genre. But I don't know if 2019, even with the Gimlet purchase by Spotify, whether the industry changes substantially or not. Where are you at? Where are you on that, Wes?
I would aspirationally hope that's going to happen, but I don't. I think we're just going to continue to have some incremental rather than transformative leaps into that world. I will say that as smart assistants and just this whole, Star Trek computer, play for me, so-and-so, as we move more into that world and we have that in our car, we have that in our living room, and because what you're describing with Serial is like a blockbuster podcast, right? This really popular thing that lots of people hear about and subscribe to. What I find, I think, to be most engaging is really the niche long tail podcasts. Being able to connect to other educators has been transformative for me since 2005-ish, mid 2000s. So I think we're going to, continue to see both phenomena occur, but I don't think we're going to see this tremendous leap into mainstream and hey, every other person is listening to a podcast. I don't think that's going to happen really soon.
Right. Second, and I think there's interesting fodder here, competition heats up for Apple. What they're talking about is the Apple Podcast Directory and also the Apple Podcast app. And the Apple Podcast app, if I remember correctly, is still the preferred client for most podcast listeners, partly because I think unless you are a super podcast listener, kind of like Wes and myself, you probably haven't moved beyond that particular app as of yet. And they mentioned two particular potential competitors, Pandora being one of them, and they also mentioned Spotify. Pandora, which was purchased by Sirius last year, Sirius FM or Sirius XM Radio purchased Sirius or Pandora. I should see Sirius maybe getting more into the broadcasting of podcasting. They do have several business channels and like long form nonfiction channels that a lot of the more formal podcast, narrative podcast productions would probably fit in well with that. Spotify is a terrible podcasting app. It's hard to find podcasts on Spotify. I would love to maybe use less apps, right? Like if I can, have one app be a multitasker on my phone, that's better for everyone involved. But my preferred podcast app is Pocket Cast. It has been for probably a half dozen years or so. And and it's easy to use. It's being developed. It was purchased by a conglomerate of public radio producer.
Oh, it's not owned by that Australian originator who created it now?
No, Pocket Cast is now owned by
Shifted Jelly, I think it was called.
Yeah, well, and I think they were purchased whole, including the Shift Jelly folks are now working for the conglomeration. But it's
I didn't know that.
NPR, WBEZ Chicago, I think, was in on it. PRI, Public Radio International, was also part of the group. But the bottom line is that Apple probably needs some competition, especially if people are going to have a better podcasting experience. So you're on Pocket Cast, Wes?
I am. And one of the things that I'll observe, I don't need Spotify at this. Well, I just use the Google Assistant directly to listen to most of my podcasts. I love how, and Google Assistant is not great at this, but like I'll listen to This Week in Tech, quite a bit. And these are long shows, right? They're an hour and a half sometime. I mean, their end of year show was like 3 hours or something. So being able to pick up on, upstairs and downstairs and in the car is a really useful thing. It's not quite there yet. Perhaps I have you sprung for a Google Home Hub or any of the smart assistants with a screen yet, Jason, at home? Yeah, I haven't either. So it'll be interesting when we have those, and just as this continues to mature, because I still, in terms of discovery and remembering things and whatever, it's kind of like where we're in this Harry Potter world, right? Where you need to memorize the spell and know, the name of the podcast and get it exactly right. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that matures and grows. I think though, for me, and this is true of our show right now, right? Like we're not making any money doing this. We just kind of love doing it. But to segue back to our original article, we were talking about YouTube and the creator community and how important that's been to the growth and the virality and just the mainstream nature of YouTube with the creatives. It'll be interesting how, micropayments, and we've seen, what's it called? Patreon, really grow. And so some different people being able to make their living doing podcasts. I don't know how much that's going. I think that's probably going to have a significant role in the growth of podcasting. And so anyway, you've got this mainstream sort of big splash podcast, and people are pushing and hopeful that that's going to bring more people into the platform. But frankly, the thing that interests and energizes me the most, although I did mention the Twit podcast and liking those, but it has been a lot of just, smaller podcasts being created by, educators and others that probably have a relatively small audience, but yet I find that very engaging and interesting. So it'll be, I'm excited to see all of this renewal, right? We've mentioned before, I think we're in a renaissance for podcasting. Again, Anchor, that was one of the companies you mentioned. Just had a teacher, I think 2 weeks ago, asked me, hey, I want to do some podcasting with my students. What do you recommend? And shared with that with her. She just told me this week, actually, that she didn't have, there were too many kids to have a big class discussion. So she broke them up. One of them went into the hallway, and they were, as a group, having a discussion that they used the Anchor app to be able to record and podcast. And she was going to be listening to that later. It's a phenomenal modality for recording and sharing. And the fact that there are so few constraints on it is a wonderful thing. So.
Right. Well, and something I don't really understand is why more podcasts aren't being used in the classroom. And I'm talking about from a content standpoint, right?
Right.
I obviously it would be an advocate for students making podcasts, and in fact, that's something I experimented with before I left the classroom in 2010. And there have been a number of great classroom podcasts in the last 15 years since podcasting started. But there's a shocking amount of excellent content that is occurring across genres of subjects, right? And the ones I can think of just from my subject area, and I'm a social studies teacher by training, but there are dozens of great history podcasts. There's a number of wonderful government and economics podcasts that I think would be really wonderful in the classroom environment. And, I get it takes some commitment to listen to the 20, 30, 40 minutes of audio and come up with materials for it, to utilize it. But I think that, and I want to be clear, like in the same way that I think that should be a rare strategy to turn on, a video or a movie for 2 or 3 straight days in a classroom. That's not a very engaging exercise short of some interpretation. I would also say that playing a podcast for 2 or 3 straight class periods is not particularly engaging either. But when it's on the go, like it can be, and there are great small short form podcasts that are 4, 5, 7, 12, 14 minutes that could be incredibly good fodder for discussion in the next day in the classroom or in somewhat of a flipped classroom environment. I think they could be really powerful to engage in discussion. And I've seen a lot of good classroom podcasts being made. I haven't at least ran into a lot of teachers as of yet that are using that content for good inside the classroom.
It occurs to me that perhaps the reason we don't have that explosion yet, maybe this will be coming with AI and with voice recognition, is we don't have a Google for podcasting, right? The way in which Google was able to organize textual content and meta tagged information and continues to be, I think, the world's best search engine for that. We don't have that kind of a smart search engine aggregating those pieces. And so that may be an opportunity that Google or other search engine companies can seize a hold of in terms of making that kind of content readily indexable and crowdsourced in terms of, vote ups and having an algorithm basically that's going to really help you, again, have superpowers, kind of like I was talking about with the Perspective AI or whatever that project was, Jigsaw, giving you the ability to sort through a vast trove of content that you'd never have time to go through yourself, but you're able to use these tools and be able to find, amazing, engaging things. And Peggy also put into the show notes, or not the show notes, the chat, it's just, students definitely prefer video over podcasts. And my comeback to that is there's thousands of neurons that connect our eyes to our brain and just hundreds that connect our ears to our brain. So I'm told. I haven't done that operation myself. But, we're really all visual learners if our eyes are working. So The good news is there's all kinds of ways in which engaging audio is being put to, to a sketch note or, just some kind of narrated slideshow. And there's ways to be able to do that. So again, my desire for that would be to encourage folks to be content creators and content producers. And hopefully there'll be tools in addition to Anchor that are going to fuel the frictionless creation and sharing of podcast media, which might blur the lines and not just be a strict audio podcast, but may include sketch notes, or it may include, different kinds of visuals that are going to be related, synchronized visuals.
Absolutely. I would encourage you, the article's long, if you're interested in this topic, and I think that to me, we're just on the verge over and over and over again of something that could be really amazing here from a media standpoint. Check out that article, which will be in our show notes at edtechsr.com.
Awesome. I'll do a quick one. This is a Gizmodo article. Peggy mentioned this one in the chat. It's from February 4th. Crypto Exchange says it can't repay $190 million to clients after founder dies with the only password. And actually, this is interesting from a headline standpoint, right? Because you basically got the whole article summary in that headline. But yes, the founder of this cryptocurrency, which I've never heard of before, Quadriga CX, the 30-year-old founder, Gerald Cotton, was the only person who had the passwords. And so they had something called funds in cold storage, and then funds that were in a hot wallet used for transfer. And there were roughly 26,500 Bitcoins, which is 92 million US dollars, and then all these other different kinds of coins. I mean, just as a little analysis into where currency is today, this is a phenomenal article. A number of years ago, probably in 2010, I had a chance to visit a museum in China that was in Shanghai. It has this incredible currency section, and the things that were used for currency. And of course, Chinese history just blows your mind as a North American for how little, our comparative history is. But currency itself is fascinating. What is happening today with currency is very opaque and almost not understandable, other than being a horse race and a real gamble, I think, to a lot of people. But I think this speaks to the importance of the password. So, Jason, is there anyone in your organization that if they were hit by a bus or something else unfortunate happened to them, you all might be up a creek because they have the only password?
It's funny you should mention that. We actually refer to it exactly as that, the hit by a bus problem, right? And we're a small organization. We're what we like to call administratively thin, which means we just have a handful of people that run most of the systems there. And we actually work on that quite aggressively to have continuity service plans in case something bad should happen to someone in the organization. And so we have master passwords, and we have password files that are under a literal lock and key, and things that are related to that. But I mean, I think that's it's what disappointed me about the government's original kind of banning of cryptocurrency. I think cryptocurrency is going to be a reality whether we like it or not, right? So all the talk of making it illegal and trying to find ways to kind of over-regulate until they can wrap their brains around it. I think there's going to be cryptocurrency whether we want cryptocurrency or not. So we should be working together to understand it and to develop it in a way so $190 million doesn't disappear with the swift running of a bus. So, yeah, I think that's something that's a pretty important piece.
The cat is ready to be back in the show. It's an attention economy, folks, and cats are not to be left out. Where to next?
Let's see. Let's do a couple of the security articles here while we're on the security topic. CNET reported on January 27th that the Japanese government is planning on, changed a law to allow them to utilize government workers to hack into insecure household IoT devices to warn users either to patch the software for them or to warn end users that this was happening. And this is being used under the security protocols put in place for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Japan, by many reports, is woefully under prepared for that particular event. They don't have enough hotel rooms. I heard the other day, I believe it was on NPR, they are desperately attempting to get infrastructure in place, even though in many ways Tokyo would be more prepared for large numbers of people in small confined spaces than you would assume many other countries cities and countries on Earth to be so. But they feel like it's such a security problem that so many people have poorly secured Internet of Things devices in their home that they will utilize government services to hack into people's light bulbs and either update the firmware for them or let them know that their house is at risk of being hacked by hackers. So, Wes, would you like me to hack into your home tonight?
No, I think I'm good for that. But I am going to say, because my initial one was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I'm going to say kudos to the Japanese government for taking this issue seriously, because I think we are freaking asleep at the wheel about this right now. We've got all kinds of companies making all kinds of internet-connected devices. If we'd like to get into some of the terms we've talked about on past shows, recall the Mirai botnet. The Mirai botnet was created by a couple young kids in Alaska who were trying to have a Minecraft hosting company, and they wanted a way to bring down their opponents or their competitors. And what they ended up doing was creating this incredibly powerful tool that would harness the capabilities of IoT devices like security cameras and other things in your house. In fact, they got so scared that they decided to throw it out into the community so that hopefully they wouldn't be blamed. And then at the time, that was utilized for the largest denial of service attack that we've seen on the internet so far. And it crippled, I think, Brian Krebs, website. And it was it's crazy. So I think this sounds on its face like, what the heck? The government's going to try to hack, but it also, I think, perhaps shows leadership on the part of the Japanese government taking this seriously and recognizing that this is a time bomb, because if we let all of these devices, because remember, a denial of service attack is when lots and lots of devices ping you or send packet requests to a particular IP address, and then that overwhelms that server and takes that network offline effectively. So kudos to Japan. Am I off base with that?
No, I think you're right. And even if the strategy is maybe too far from their action, the fact that they're taking seriously would put it ahead, I think, of where the United States is on this right now. And I get where I just looked, for example, my wife is not at home tonight. She is traveling. So she has a device or two with her. There are still 17 devices hooked up to my internet, active devices hooked up to my internet right now. And it includes a couple of light bulbs, a couple of home assistants, 3 or 4 smart outlets. I have a couple of monitoring outlets that are monitoring the amount of currents going through things so I can track use over time. I purchased a smart power strip last week that can turn off individual items. So in my office in the basement of my home, which is where I have the big monitors and the printer and all of the desktop equipment, that turns off automatically at every night, because I know that even if I'm sitting there, if the monitor turns off or the printer turns off, it's not likely to harm me, but I have to press it back on. But I've already noticed in 45 days that saved me quite a bit of power each month. But it's still something that is a hackable device in my home. And my wife and I live, we're adults, no kids, and we have 24 devices in our home, I'm guessing we can't be alone in that.
As a sign of the times, a few years ago, presenting it at conferences, that was a favorite question of mine, was to ask people to guesstimate how many devices in their home today connects to the internet, right? And so at that point, you're counting computers, you're thinking Apple TV, Roku, those kind of things. But we're going to rapidly be in a place where we almost can't count the numbers of devices. Maybe, right? I mean, not everybody's going to jump on the smart home bandwagon, and we haven't gone whole hog on that. But it definitely is something that we need to be talking about. And again, whose responsibility is that to talk about security and to also educate the masses, right? I think we've considered school this place where, we're going to get this education into kids and then college, and then you're out in the world. Boy, with things like this, it is absolutely important to educate everyone, right? Grandma, grandpa, everyone who's a consumer, who's buying things, needs to be aware of how things need to be updatable. You need to have an eye to security, and all of us in our families and our lives need those people we can call on to help us with these sorts of things. And by the way, we need some regulation, right? Oop, did I say that? We are not, I don't think it's going to be wonderful to just leave everything to the market to regulate itself when it comes to some of these kinds of things. We're seeing that with Facebook, and of course, what we fear is an overregulation, and that we're going to have too much of a response, and hopefully the internet doesn't get broken as a result. But in the case of IoT, consumer protection, right? Ralph Nader, think about that. We've had a long history in certainly the United States of recognizing why we need to have some government regulation, and also some non-governmental groups that are going to serve as checks on that, right? That's one of the reasons we need a free press. We need journalists to be able to monetize their living and make their way, because we need people checking up on these companies and folks who understandably are wanting to make a buck. But if you're making the buck and you're putting thousands or millions of devices not just in the marketplace but literally on the internet, Mirai botnet times 1,000. It's possible. So,
absolutely, yep. Okay, where to next, sir?
Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about the Google stuff. I'll toss this one to you. This is 9 to 5 Google. I'd found this on another site but didn't put the article in because it's the same issue. Google's password checkup Chrome extension warns of breached third-party logins. I'll just mention that something I enjoy mentioning in digital citizenship contexts is this website, Have I Been Pawned, which allows you to put your email address in and be able to see how many hacks your email has been in and possibly your password compromised. And, generally that's a get your attention sort of thing. The article which I had read on this topic importantly said that Google had been working, of course, with security folks to figure out how to not pass this data, openly. And so there's actually a secured hash that is being, transferred back and forth, and it is not, openly sharing your password. So is this something you've installed, Jason? And are you putting it on a list of things that everybody should be taking a look at, or is it that good?
I like it so far, and to give you a sense of what this is, it's a Chrome browser extension, and to be honest, extensions make the Chrome browser, right? I like that it's fast. I like that it's secure. Some people disagree with me on that, but I like that, generally speaking, of a phenomenon. But what makes Chrome for me an advanced browser, and since I am on a Chromebook now 95% of the time, I need to install extensions to add some features to my tool set in a browser. But essentially what the extension does is that it checks of saved usernames and passwords, and not everyone agrees it's a good idea to save your usernames and passwords in the Chrome browser. I feel secure in that based on improvements made in the last 24 months by Google inside the Chrome browser itself. But it essentially checks when you log into a website, it checks to see if either the username or the password has been in a compromised set, and it apparently is keeping an offline database. I'm sorry, not offline database, but its own database for this. So it's not going out to a live database. It's not pinging your username and password to somewhere else. It's doing it internally, and it tells you whether or not it believes that this username and password set has been compromised in it. And I think it's a pretty interesting phenomenon. You have to trust Google to do this, right? Like in a lot of ways, you have to trust Google in a lot of things in light of the kind of the cloud shenanigans in the last couple of years. But I think it's a good proactive step. And I will tell you that I feel very safe. I'm now using long, secure passwords in every website that matters to me. I do not repeat passwords across websites. I use LastPass as a password manager as well, which also looks for duplicate passwords amongst my group. And I use two-factor authentication. So when I log into important websites for the first time on a browser, it asks me to confirm on an app on my phone whether or not it's me truly logging in. And I think this, amongst other tools, is a great idea for upping your security game.
I had an opportunity about a week ago to address our faculty, and I had about 5 minutes. But it's always a compliment to have a chance to be at these meetings. We only have a couple of them a year. And I usually actually end up talking about safety, security, phishing. There was actually a term pretexting, which I hadn't heard before. That's when somebody is, impersonating somebody and trying to basically, convince you that they are who they purport to be, so they can, get your password or get you to log in or do something. And so one of the big, you're going to move my cheese that much recommendations that I gave to our faculty was not just to have the course multi-factor turned on everywhere. They've got to turn it on for their, school Gmail accounts, because we've been enforcing that for over a year. Not for students, just for faculty, staff. Saying that they need to turn that on everywhere, and saying they need to use a password manager, but saying on every website, you need to use a different password, preferably a very long and complex one. And so this would definitely help that, because it would just flag and say, hey, this, that it's not only that you've used it somewhere else, but this has been a compromised password. So I just installed it and appreciate the shout out. Where next?
Let's see here. I've lost our link window, filling with other words. Let me talk about a nerdy thing. So I risk being mocked by Wes, because I know this has been a feature on Mac laptops and iOS devices for a couple of years now. But Google announced in 2018 that they were going to be releasing instant tethering. So if you have a Chrome Pixel book and a Chrome Pixel phone, it can instantly, with one click of a button, utilize the Chromebook can utilize the internet connection of a phone, so you don't have to start up a hotspot or anything. It can just use it when it's right next to each other. That's a great feature, but I also don't use a Pixel phone. I utilize an LG phone, and Google is starting to roll this out, not to my phone quite yet, but to other Chromebooks models and Android phones. And I think it's amazing, especially in the era of unlimited data. Both Wes and I are T-Mobile users and can use them for hotspots. And the fact that I can walk into Starbucks, utilize my own internet, which is completely secure, requires no VPN, open up my laptop, utilize the internet access of my phone, shut my laptop down, no fuss, no muss, no clicking of buttons to get on there, I think is amazing. And good on Google for making those two devices work even closer together.
Definitely. Hey, great tip from Peggy in our chat room. She said she learned today from Steve Dotto from a webinar that you can create folders in the extension settings and then organize your extensions in Chrome. And that sounds kind of like a cool thing.
That's awesome.
I use the extension Extensity to basically keep a lot off. So here's a quick geeky one. Hitting the books, Ray Kurzweil on humanity's nanobot-filled future. This was in Gadget on February the 3rd. And this is a summary of a conversation with Ray Kurzweil, who, if you do not know, is one of the advocates of this concept called the singularity, which is the point at which artificial intelligence will equal human intelligence. And then, after that point, we're off to the races, and who knows what is going to happen, especially, if they're able to replicate themselves. And that's where, visions of Schwarzenegger and Predator and all kinds of things like that. And what is that? Skynet come in. The thing I would say about this is I've watched a number of Ray Kurzweil's videos on YouTube. Again, the recommendation engine of YouTube can lead you down, rabbit holes that may not be great for conspiracy theory and very outlier radical views, but it can also be absolutely phenomenal when you're passionate about something. Like, I actually am really into Freddie Mercury and Queen, and we've gone to see the Bohemian Rhapsody, several times. And so anyway, I've been watching that, and it recommends all this amazing, different videos. If you get into watching Ray Kurzweil and AI, there's phenomenal talks at Google and, what is it called? It's like, there's Singularity University, right? I think that Kurzweil's co-founded with Diamantis, who's the guy that sponsors the X Prizes. And anyway, what this helps me think about is we are in an evolutionary process where this device right here, this smartphone, is becoming part of our brain. And because of human physiology, and I'm quoting Kurzweil here, our frontal, lobe, the neocortex in our brain can only be so big, right? Because otherwise we just wouldn't be able to be born. But when we're able to connect this neocortex to the cloud, we are able to dramatically improve our cognitive abilities and our ability to think and access information and just the power of our brains. And so I would just commend this as a mind-stretching article. And if you are not familiar with Kurzweil, I mean, certainly a lot of people don't agree with him, but he's had a lot of predictions right. I think the guy's probably a millionaire. He's invented all kinds of things. He's really, really smart. And so his vision of how we are merging with our technology, it informs me as I hear people really berating, especially kids, but it's adults as well, and screens and what's happening. I actually see this as part of an evolutionary process, which is, scary at one level. But according to Kurzweil, I mean, this is part of our inevitable evolution as a species. So are you a Kurzweil fan? And if so, do you think the singularity will be something we'll see in our lifetimes, or will we see it at all, Jason?
I think we will see the singularity. I've read just a little bit, but I would have said no a couple of years ago. But to be honest, things are speeding up a little bit, like in a way that I wasn't expecting, to be honest.
Okay. Well, we are nearing the top of the hour. We've probably got time for a couple more articles. Anything else that you would like to hit before we Geek of the Week it?
Sure. This morning's New York Times reported that in 2018, they reported $709 million in digital revenue. They were attempting to get to $800 million by the end of 2020, and it appears they're likely to hit that mark. What is interesting is that 3.3 million people pay for the company's digital products, which is a 20% or 27% jump from the year before. That also means that their total number of paid subscriptions for digital and print reached 4.3 million, which is an all-time high of New York Times subscribers. And obviously, the New York Times health does not signify the health of the entire media industry, but I, for one, am very encouraged that people are paying for good quality journalism. And it's something that I've committed to, particularly since the 2016 election. And I would encourage you, if you are like me and read a lot of journalistic content, and thrive on news and in good journalism, pay for news magazines, pay for newspapers, pay for content, because we need people to fund the future of those that will keep everything else in check.
And on that note, Jason, maybe we can take as a personal team challenge for 2019, doing some kind of experimentation with that, whether, through Patreon or there's different podcasting, ad models, which I don't love ads in podcasts. I actually love the fact that on my Smart Assistant, I can say, hey, forward, 2 minutes or 3 minutes or however long the ads are. But, I'm a fan of playing with media. I'm a fan of iterating, using things as a sandbox. So I don't know, maybe that's something that we could think about. I want to make sure everyone remembers this is the EdTech Situation Room. You can find all the links to our shows on edtechsr.com/links. We will be grabbing the individual article links for this show and putting those into the show notes. But you can certainly find this on your favorite smart assistant if you ask to play the latest episode of the EdTech Situation Room. Hopefully you can find it on your other favorite podcatcher software. We always wrap up with some Geeks of the Week, and I will go quickly here with one. This is a video called What a Smell Looks Like, and it's from a channel that is called Alice Magician. The actual place is in Burlington, Vermont. It's called Alice and the Magician. And shout out to Lucy, Tech Savvy Girl on Twitter, who's the founder of the Create, Make, and Learn conference. And it was at that conference that we went to their shop. And it's just an incredible idea where they're able to extract the essential smells of all kinds of things. And they actually work a lot with bars and drinks and cooks and chefs and things. But I mean, my favorite one was it's the smell of a pine fire, on a crisp winter morning, and that whole, the smell of hearing, or not hearing, of smelling a fire. Like, how do you have it in a spray bottle? They have a clear plastic cup and they spray it and they put it under your nose, and then there you are, you're experiencing this. But it's an amazing visualization. And that's from a PBS series, What a Smell Looks Like. A great curiosity link if you want to share those kind of things with students and get them talking. How about you, Jason? What do you got for us this week?
Based on podcasting information we talked about earlier, HotPod is an excellent email newsletter and website that talks about the podcast industry. It is obviously super inside baseball for podcast fans, but if you're interested in this medium, and obviously Wes and I are, and I know a lot of normal adults, non-geeky adults that are super into podcasting, it's a great place to find news, and they're the ones that broke the story to me on the then likely and now confirmed pickup of Gimlet by Spotify. So HotPod is a great email newsletter website.
Fantastic. Well, Jason, where can people find you? I hear that there is an event coming up soon in Seattle, which sadly I will not be attending, but I heard rumors that you'll be sharing some thoughts. Is that rumor valid?
That is absolutely valid. The Northwest Council for Computer Education, February 2019 conference in fabulous Seattle, Washington. There are still registration spots open. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers, including a time with me on a number of new presentations I put together. Every year, NCC is where I break my presentations. I do them there first. It's an agreement I have with them. That's the first time I offer those presentations is at their conference. I'm also doing our annual look at interesting tools called 30 in 50 with Mike Agustinelli, the NCC Tech Savvy teacher in residence. I am the Tech Savvy administrator in residence for NCCE, and it's just a really great conference. I would say that it's intimately sized in that it is not 20,000 people of ISTE. It's just 2,000 people in a great space in downtown Seattle. So if you've never been, Seattle's one hop from 70 different cities across the United States, and you can literally jump over on one airplane.
Oh, your microphone just got you. The cat muted you.
Yeah, the cat muted me there. So it's one hop from 70 cities in the United States, and you could stop by and not only experience downtown Seattle, which is just one of the best places on earth. You can meet wonderful people from around the Pacific Northwest and across the United States interested in technology education. www.ncc.org. You can also follow NCC on Twitter, NCC_EdTech. What about you guys?
Very good. I am W. Fryer on Twitter, and my blog is speedofcreativity.org. And I will be this weekend getting back into publishing my weekly video, which I lapsed over the holidays and have to get back into that routine. And those are being published on the Twitter handle Videos by Wes, and I'm putting those out on playingwithmedia.com in my video library. So I always put those out for at least a week, but my last one's been up for about a month because I haven't put up another one. So anyway, a post last night I just did about an ebook project, my favorite technology integration project of the year, with one of our 12th grade teachers whose seniors make some amazing ebook picture books, actually in printed books, and then read those to their kids, and the ways today or this year in which they also narrated those in their own voices and created some phenomenal artwork. So hopefully, we have given you some food for thought. We appreciate you tuning in. We would love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on our Twitter handles. You can use the hashtag EdTechSR, or reach out to us at the EdTechSR channel. And you can also comment on our blog and podcast website, which is edtechsr.com. Until next time, we encourage you to stay savvy, stay safe, and if you're in Missoula, stay warm.